All right. Welcome, everyone, to this panel talk, which marks 1 year since the military coup in Myanmar, or Burma. This talk is organized by the Olof Palme International Center, ABF, Sunderby Folkhögskola, and the Association of Social Democratic Youth, Students. My name is Axel Kronholm. I'm a journalist covering Burma, and I'm very privileged to be the moderator for today's talk. We have a distinguished panel with a long experience of everything Burma. They are Tintin New, director of Burma News International, BNI, an ethnic media network consisting of independent news organizations across Burma's ethnic areas. We also have Debbie Stoddard, founder and coordinator of ASEAN Burma, a network of organizations that have been working with human rights in Burma for over 25 years now. And Mikael Hauer, head of Asia at Olof Palme International Center, which is the Swedish labor movement's umbrella organization for international solidarity and advocacy. And just some brief practical information. This talk is going to be about 45 minutes. We're going to leave some room at the end for questions. So if there's anything you want to ask our panelists, just write it in the chat box and we'll collect the questions afterwards and try to get to as many as we have time for. But so, yeah, without further ado, let's get started. As I said, today marks 1 year since the military grabbed power in Burma. And we're now seeing a situation a year on that is rapidly deteriorating. There are, especially in ethnic areas, there are airstrikes against cities, vast numbers of people displaced. And I want to start with you, Debbie. Your organization has described the violence that is now taking place as comparable to Syria and even greater than in Afghanistan. How did it get so violent and how did we get here?
Thanks, Axel. The conflict figures for September, the monthly conflict figures for September to December and probably for January were higher in Burma, Myanmar than Syria and Afghanistan combined for those months. And this is, I think this is partly because ASEAN, the region, and also the EU have really not paid that much attention to what's going on the ground. People had gotten used to a situation of conflict in Burma, Myanmar, because in the ethnic areas, like Rakhine State, there was genocidal violence in 2017, and in Karen State has been in a situation of low intensity conflict for 70 years, and in Kachin State, we've had war for more than 10 years. So people just got used to the idea, but when we start seeing urban areas, cities being subjected to airstrikes and this rise in atrocity crimes, we started to look at the data and realized that because all that happened after the coup were nothing but international statements, and the junta was not being punished for what they were doing, they were just escalating the violence. And they were escalating the violence because they couldn't gain territorial control of the country. There's so widespread resistance, particularly led by young people and women all around the country. This resistance is actually bigger, much bigger than the 88 uprising in 1988. So we've seen the military also panic and start intensifying their attacks and also committing more and more brutal atrocity crimes against the local population. So I think the military junta assumed that they would be able to gain control within a few weeks. They did not. Now, a year later, the whole country has spiraled into extreme forms of violence. And unless we can sanction the military, stop the military from access to money and weapons, we will not be able to halt this situation.
You say it's as comparable to the violence we're seeing in Syria and Afghanistan. Like how, and it seems to be just getting worse. How bad can it get?
Well, in Kaya or Karenni state, where the Christmas massacre took place, 37 internally displaced men, women, and children were burned alive. They were called terrorists and burned alive. And these were displaced people trying to get to villages, to a safe place for Christmas with their relatives. In Karenni state in October, half of the state's population had been displaced by violence. And then their state capital was subjected to airstrikes. The biggest city in that state was subjected to airstrikes a few weeks ago. So we are actually seeing this type of very intense violence taking place on the ground. And, we're looking at 8,000 conflict incidents that harmed civilians in the space of 10 months. What that means is that there are 27 lethal attacks a day happening in different parts of the country. It is actually a situation of war. We are no longer facing a coup situation where the military is trying to secure the place. The military has gotten out of control and has essentially launched a war on its civilians.
And Tintin, you at Burma News International, your teams of reporters in the ethnic areas are witnessing all of this firsthand. How would you describe the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding here?
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for, giving me a chance to talk about the humanitarian crisis. Sometimes when we talk about humanitarian crisis, we just think about the area that being attacked day to day, but also I think the whole country is actually facing with a humanitarian crisis because people can no longer do their business and they no longer run their daily life. So I would just want to say that the whole country is in crisis right now. But as for like a Kaya state, Chin state, and some part of like a Korean state, of course that the attacks become very intensified, and then and also like there are many numbers of IDPs are increasing in daily. So like a Karenni alone, as Debbie also said that half of the populations are already IDPs. Actually, when we counted, it's already 170,000 IDPs. So out of 300,000 people living in Kaya state, which is the smallest state and also the most poor state in the country, which has been already very poor before the coup. So now like the people, the IDPs, their main support they get from other people. So it's kind of, we say like a people to people supporting so that those IDPs are surviving. So that like that means that very little international humanitarian aids are reaching to the IDPs in Kaya state. So that is really showing that the bigger and the worst humanitarian crises are going to happen soon if there is not enough international humanitarian aid is considering to reach to those areas. And also, as you may be aware that the Karenni state, to come to the borders of Thailand is very difficult. It's more like a very blocked area. It's very close area. So that, if they cannot get any, support and they're trying to find different ways to support them, then that would be really like, devastating situation where majority of the people are going to starve, and especially children, young children, and then also mothers, pregnant women, and elderly will be in most vulnerable situations. So it is, aside from the food, there's also like a very important for us to provide shelters, especially for those vulnerable groups. That you may heard from some cases that some elderly dying because of the cold, and some infant dying because of not enough blankets. And some of the people got sick and get different kinds of like a disease because there is no proper shelter and no hygienic. So I think like aside from food, there are all different support that we will need to manage the zonas. If not, that will be a big problem. And also like recently, one of the IDP area that is in Pruso was had been attacked by airstrike. So even IDP camp is not safe anymore. So that means that we will have to do very urgent relocation for those IDPs. So that this can, in order to relocate them, we will need a safe move, we will need special arrangements. So all those arrangements require money. So I think that's also another source, another like a consideration that our international community have to pay attention to.
Well, we also know that the military is actively preventing aid from reaching those in need. So how can international aid actors navigate this environment and reach the people in need?
Yeah, that's why we are talking about providing aid through cross-border, because like we can no longer, transport any food, any support, through the main road, because like all the trade routes are also being blocked, and then any ex-worker carrying food are being shot to death. And so that is no longer safe anymore. That's why we will have to consider supporting the aid through cross-border. So like through the borders, and that is what we are trying to suggest into the international communities.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to bring in Mikael Hauer, head of Asia at Olof Palme International Center. Now, for many years before this coup, you have been providing support to the same activists and organizations that have now come in the crosshairs of the security forces. How have you had to adapt to the coup in the work that you do?
Well, I think for years, Olof Palme Center has been promoting what we call an adaptive management. And we early on realized that this would really put our policies to the test, this coup and this crisis. If we look at the full year, I think we have gone through some different phases. Early on, we were trying to allow for activists to get involved in the protest movement and really be, actively organizing and so on. While later on in the crisis, we have sort of tilted to more about focusing on security, from protecting activists, from having safe and secure communication lines, etc. So I think me and my colleagues can definitely witness that throughout the year we have probably planned and then replanned and then replanned again for 5-6 times for each of our partners to be able to meet their needs and to be able to provide them with the necessary tools for them to keep on working, keep on supporting their target group on the ground. And I also want to say, in parallel, we also have to take into consideration that this collapse or paralyzed sectors like the bank sector, etc., that has also, of course, caused us a bit of headache. But yeah, with great dialogue and with a lot of, I would say, listening and negotiating with the partners, we have come up with some solid solutions, which I am quite proud of.
And one category of your partners is the labor movement, who have been at the forefront of this uprising since the beginning, basically. We've also seen a very violent backlash against labor organizations. Can you say something briefly about what their situation is like today and how they can even operate?
Yes, if I start with the workers themselves, we have seen now some statistics coming out in January, kind of summing up 2021. And we know for a fact that looking at the industrial zones in the bigger cities, we have about 150 closed factories and roughly somewhere between 150,000 to 200,000 workers being unemployed. On top of that, I also want to mention that a lot of the factory owners have also utilized this opportunity to get rid of, let's say, salary staff or contracted staff, and then rehiring them as day workers. And this is a way to push the salaries down. The minimum wage, according to law, it's about 4,800 chats. But if you take in a day worker, you can pay them as low as 3,600. So yeah, even those who still have a job earn significantly lower income. And we know that a lot of the workers are struggling financially to survive, to pay rent, to pay food, to support their families in villages far away. So this is sort of like a backdrop. And then on top of that, we also saw early on in this crisis that trade unions and organizations, other organizations working on labor rights also got declared unlawful by the junta early on. And this has meant that everything that used to be done in the open, workers or labor awareness workshops, counseling, legal advice, etc., that a lot of our partners was providing. All of this have been either disappeared or is now being handled in different ways. Of course, underground, it's a very dangerous scene, and they cannot move around openly and perform their job as they used to. We know that that trade union activists are still active. They're still trying to support the workers out in the factories. But again, this has to be done in a very small scale, in a very careful manner. And another thing I want to mention is that a lot of the centers or institutions for settling disputes have also been dysfunctional during the crisis. Either they are not working completely, or they're being run by the military regime. And first of all, the officers are not very knowledgeable about labor law. And second of all, the increase of corruption has really made it more or less impossible for workers to get any sort of justice out of these processes. So yeah, it's a very, very tough situation for the labor movement at the moment.
I want to turn now to the international scene for a bit. Like just yesterday, the US and UK governments announced additional sanctions on senior military figures. Debbie, your organization is calling for the United Nations Security Council to take concrete action, as you put it. What would that look like at this point in time? And let me also ask you, since we know the limitations of the Security Council, it's not always easy to get concrete action from there. What other avenues for justice and accountability do you see outside of the UN system?
Thanks, Axel. I think at this point, we have to understand that the junta is facing a liquidity crisis. They really need foreign exchange revenue because the local people have refused to pay taxes to the junta or pay their electricity bills. And the international financial institutions like the World Bank and Asian Development Bank have already frozen about $11 billion worth of loans and grants, so that the military cannot get its hands on that. So it's used a lot of money to wage this war, and it needs more money. So I think this is something that's quite important. And one of the main earners of foreign exchange for the junta at this time is the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. So oil and gas exports is actually very valuable to the junta, and we need to cut that flow of cash. But at the UN Security Council level, I think a lot of people will be surprised to know that there is not yet a global arms embargo on the military junta. So this means the military junta has been able to get its hands on weapons and ammunition from many other countries. Most of the European countries already have an embargo, but this is a self-regulating embargo. I think if we wanted to make sure that people in Burma were not going to be subjected to less violence, we need to have a UN Security Council global arms embargo on the junta. The other thing is that people have also called for the Security Council to refer Myanmar to the International Criminal Court, because the big problem, whether it's the root cause of the Rohingya genocide or the atrocity crimes happening all around the country, is military impunity. This was something that was not addressed during the transition period. And now I think people all over the country recognize that we need accountability for those crimes so that future military will not do this over and over again. So most people were concerned that Russia and China are allies of the military junta and will exercise a veto at the UN Security Council. But last Friday, China actually seemed to finally realize that the crisis was getting out of hand, because the Chinese representative to the Security Council actually called urgently, recognized the urgent need to halt the violence in Myanmar. So this is actually an important signal that finally China has realized it's not in its interest to allow this war to continue in its frontier. Unfortunately, we do need to have the rest of the international community jump in on this opening and make sure that something changes significantly now. We can't afford to wait another few months.
And how do you see, what role can countries like, well, for instance, Sweden, this panel is hosted by a number of Swedish organizations. What can countries like us do?
Well, you know, Sweden is very proud of its feminist foreign policy. And at the very least, Sweden needs to make much more noise about the fact that this military junta is routinely violating the UN Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security. So this, you know, the UN Security Council resolutions are considered part of international law. It's supposed to be binding. And we need to push harder to compel the junta to respect that. You know, women are all over the country, but particularly in ethnic areas, are suffering a disproportionate a burden from all this violence and economic chaos created by the junta. So I think we need to recognize that. But I think also, you know, there are so many women dissidents, including members of parliament and activists and refugees. At the very least, we hope that Sweden will at least host these people who are in very dire situation, to provide some safety for them and protection for them, so that they can continue their work.
Continue. Let me let you in here. You were nodding. You have a long experience working on gender rights as well. What do you think?
Whenever there's a crisis happen or any like a conflict happen, of course, like women are the one who suffer the most. So this become like a kind of a very normalized word to anyone who hear it. And sometimes people forget to put this issue important. So normally they would talk about like a, you know, political issue. I don't know for what are the, you know, the other political issue if they put aside, you know, about the gender and these issues that those are so important for the people of Burma. You know, when we talk about IDPs, of course, when you look at it, mainly women. Because like, as Debbie also said that, you know, the resistance movement is very strong. That means that most of the men, young or old, actually join those resistance movement. Of course, there are some percentage of women, I'm very proud, are also joining. But for children and elderly, who is going to take care of it? The women are the one who have to take care. So women are the one bearing all the consequences, all the difficulties and challenges in their life. And then any of their children who are killed, any of their husbands who are tortured to death, and they cry from their heart and every day. So we can hear those cry every day, every day. But it seems like even always like you know, neglecting the special needs of women in that case. So it is not only women. We can never like how to say, see women as only the victims or only you know, who are always in need. but there are also many women who are fighting together with others for this cause, and they pay their life. They've been sexually violated, they've been sexually abused, they've been raped, and they've been tortured equally to men, yeah, in the prison or outside. So that like, but these women still continued in the struggle. So I just hope that, you know, our support pay more attention to these women who are working so hard, also politicians, activists, human rights defenders, women rights defenders. So they are playing in all different fields, but they need the most attention from all our support. Yeah.
And Debbie was speaking also about the international and regional actors. If we take Thailand, for example, thus far they've been turning away refugees coming from Burma and haven't really been helpful in giving access for aid organizations. Do you see any movement regarding the Thai position, Tintin?
Yeah, before I talk about the Thai position, I also want to like talk about one of the worry, anxiety I have, because it seems like some of the international aid organizations, we feel like they may engage with the junta to provide humanitarian aid. So I don't think the people of Burma want that kind of humanitarian support if that comes from the engagement with the military junta. So we just would like to wish that the international aid organization do not collaborate with this terrorist junta. You know, the people will not agree with that. And then there is no security at all if there is like, you know, the aid coming from the approval of the military junta. That's one thing. And when for the Thailand, is like Thailand play a very key role. It has been so many years. And we always appreciate, even though there are like, you know, some hard, some very difficult situation living in Thailand, but still we appreciate that Thailand still accept us. Yeah, but anyhow, this time is like, how to say, the most critical time for us. You know, our people have no place to escape to or run to, not just the IDP or not just the refugee, but also activists, politicians. So Thailand is one of the places that they can run to and continue their work and to bring peace and justice in our country. Yeah, so we just wish that Thailand as well not, how to say, not engage or not collaborate with the military junta. And then we also wish that Thailand at least allow, you know, the aid workers or any local organization like us to work on providing aids and any other support to IDPs, refugees, and also like the activists, and then many politicians who have no proper document and living in Thailand, and also even like the organization like us, and we ourselves working here, but we are not protective at all. So I mean, like even as is working in danger in Thailand. So so that because like recently we heard that there are some kind of operation took place in the borders, and that is very much targeted to politicians and activists to arrest. And the operation seem like we cannot say it's exactly true or not, but probably the military junta gets some support from Thailand, but totally we don't know. But if that happened, our lives will be really in a bit dangerous. So that's one issue. Another thing is like for the humanitarian aid, if they, you know, there are people, when there is airstrike or when there is like artillery shelling, that they have to run to Thailand side. So in that case, what we are expecting is to have a temporary receiving center or something like that. And then to take care of, you know, those who running, and also like, and then for us be able to provide, how to say, humanitarian support. So maybe if Thailand can consider to that kind of support, that would be really, how to say, that would be really, really like, how to say, a good situation. We will be really relieved if that situation is given. If not, I think like people will be, you know, caught between, you know, all those dangerous situations. At last, they will have to pay their lives. So that what we don't want to see it. And I know that like a Sweden may not want to see it because you have been supporting for our cause for so many years. And myself, I've been working with OPC, with my other organizations. I know that OPC, SIDA, you know, and also students, youth, and all those groups are very active in helping our cause, even in our most difficult times where we are pressured to, you know, push back to inside Burma during the transition, because the so-called transition time. But at the time, the Olaf students through Olaf Burma Center is the country that really, how to say, support our decision, our position to have like a one foot in, one foot out position, to continue to be outspoken against all the mistreatment and the misdoing of the government and the military regime. So we just hope that, I also want to echo, support Debbie, that Sweden play more vital role, and also to be more public in your position, and then to continue to support us in this cause, and that kindly also advocate to other countries not to sell any arms, any how to say weapon, or even like they call it like oil for the plane, because as long as there is no oil, the plane cannot fly, so there is no airstrike. You know, our people can resist the ground fighting, but not the airstrike. So that is what we would like to request the international community, as well as Sweden, to help us. And we don't want to see any more people to be killed in this, you know, 21st century. So too much already we have been through. Thank you.
Thank you, Tintin. We're going to turn now for some of the questions that the audience have been asking. Debbie, let me start with you. A question from the audience here. Is it possible to find any compromise between the people or the opposition and the military? Is there any place where these sides can meet at this point, when so much has happened?
Good point. Actually, I've been saying that this coup is the ultimate manifestation of toxic masculinity, because Senior General Min Aung Hlaing was supposed to retire and step down from his role as Commander-in-Chief in July. And he did not want to give up the status and the power of that role. So in January, he was already pressuring Aung San Suu Kyi, in January 2021, pressuring Aung San Suu Kyi to agree to make him president before he lost his position as Commander-in-Chief. And Aung San Suu Kyi refused to give in to this pressure and this force. And this is why he had the coup. Now, what then happened is that when there was widespread opposition and resistance, instead of listening to the people, he actually started instructing his troops to become violent. So violent that even some of the military soldiers and police started to defect, because they didn't have the will to be so violent to the population. So instead of taking a step back and assessing the situation logically, Min Aung Hlaing simply started charging people with treason. 16 townships where most of the factories are in Yangon are still under military law, under martial law. And 100 people have been sentenced to death by these military courts. So with every resistance, Min Aung Hlaing just simply became more and more violent. How are we going to break this? I think we have to recognize most people join the military. Most of the military leaders join the military for economic opportunities. If we attack their source of financing and they lose money, then it becomes very clear in their economic interest to purge Min Aung Hlaing. I mean, during this time of the coup, in the 1 year, Min Aung Hlaing has just gotten richer and his family members have gotten richer at the expense of other military families. So we need to be able to contribute to that split by effectively sanctioning the military, so that the military start to realize if they want to survive economically, they have to get rid of Min Aung Hlaing. I think that's the only way they can open a space for any type of negotiation. Because Min Aung Hlaing, as this example of toxic masculinity, now still refuses to admit he's made a mistake. He's basically stuck the military on this on this roller coaster, on this train wreck. They're going off the rails, and he still refuses to actually back off because it's an issue of personal pride and ego for him. So I think we really need to make sure that the rest of the military leadership get rid of Min Aung Hlaing. Otherwise, it's going to be a war of attrition. It's just going to be an ongoing vicious cycle until it's the last person left alive. And this is not what any of us want for our friends in Burma.
Let me just ask a follow-up on that. I mean, even without Min Aung Hlaing in the picture, considering how much damage the military has inflicted on the people, is it possible to see any compromise or deal with the military that people could accept, even if he's not part of it?
You know, the transition between 2011 to 2021 was basically a power sharing arrangement between the military and the political actors. And what happened in that time is that the military consolidated its economic power without improving its behavior. Let's not forget they started the war in Kachin State and the Rohingya genocide at that time. So what is quite clear now is people are calling for accountability. And if we really want to change the situation, we will have to actually undertake and commit to transitional justice. And that means also some fundamental military reforms. So I think the idea of power sharing as it occurred in the 10 years between 2011 and 2021 should not be repeated. And what we should have is a genuine reform. And the young people and women leading the movement are calling for a genuine, inclusive federal union based on equity and equality. The National Unity Consultative Council has already convened to open up discussions about a new constitution. And we need to allow that to happen. But I think the space for negotiation with the military is basically to say, is basically to agree on how much money they can take and who's going to step down and who is going to become a civilian if they want to enter politics. I think that fundamental reform needs to happen. The military cannot continue the way it has. And even the soldiers and military families themselves have lost respect for their own institution, because this year has been tragic, not just for the people, but it's also been a failure of the military as an institution. It's lost a lot of traditional legitimacy, and anyone in the military who loves the military now has to start to wake up and understand that they need to step back and they need to be a genuine security of the people, not security for the military leader, junta, and not security of the tyrant like Min Aung Hlaing.
Thank you, Debbie. I have at least two more questions I want to find time for from the audience. Maybe a third, we'll see. Continue, at the beginning of last year, at the beginning of the coup, we saw mass protests of people in the streets, in the countryside, ordinary people showing their dislike of the coup. Can you say something about how this popular resistance looks like today? Like, not the armed resistance, not the sort of professional activism, but like ordinary people. How do they show their disapproval?
I think it is not very surprising, because people have been living under the military regime for so many years, and they only get like some kind of freedom 10 years. So like, you know, as soon as they hear that, oh, there's the military coup, and then they will have to stay under the military regime again, then no one can accept it. You know, because like people know how life was under the military regime. You know, there was full of corruption, they are full of torture, and human to human humiliations and degrading, and all sort of violations happen under the military regime, and that there is no rule of law, and that the people never get any justice. The justice is not the word that have been heard in our country before 2010. Of course, after 2010, we get just a very limited justice, of course. And then for the women who have been, the victims of war, and also who have been like a rape survivor, of course, within that 10 years, they did not get any justice as well. But that's, we have to leave it. But I mean, like, people start, people life are starting to get well developed. And there are so many opportunities, so including education and also employment opportunities. So that as soon as the coup happened, they know that they are going to lose everything. So that's why people in all sort of like lives and across the country, they all stand it. It's not, I don't even see like there is some kind of like organizing or mobilizing take place. People are willingly and with their own commitment, they stand up and then, they demand for their future and what kind of, government system that they want. So that is very normal. And then when we look at the whole country map, when we do the mapping of all the protests, it's really like, we become very, very shocked and surprised to see, I mean, from positive side. We never expect that this is going to happen. And of course, I think the military regime, they didn't expect that as well. And what was that when people realized that their crackdown on the peaceful protester was so cruel, then people choose that, okay, we have to use the armed struggle. Armed struggle is the only ways to fight back this cruel terrorist military coup, because they're using weapons and snipers and to kill these people. So I mean, like you see that how people are very strong and very motivated and very committed, and then many young choose to join this revolution, this struggle. So I think like, this is one of the most shocking, time for the military regime. They have never got this kind of resistance in their lives. And I mean, like before 2010 for so many 40, 50 years. So I think like, that's why we are very hopeful, but we are competing with an enemy who had all sort of weapons. And then they are getting resources and they are able to buy all weapons from other countries. So that as long as it is continuing, then I think like no matter how committed the people are, we don't have enough weapon, and we have to support ourselves to survive, because we cannot bribe or we cannot take the monies of the people. And the people are the ones who are donating. We don't know how long the people can donate, right? So people are also facing with the economic crisis. And so I think like, yeah, that's what I see. I mean like, so we get, the support and also the global embargo, as Debbie mentioned, and also enough humanitarian support, and also give some kind of protection to the activists and politicians. Those are working and are mobilizing the people, because they need to be there so that the people know that they have hope, that they can continue. I think this kind of momentum needs to be continued. And international governments, I know that they are doing the best. UK, US, and also some of the EU countries are also really working very hard, but not enough. I think we will have to, increase more of the support for them.
You mentioned the need for hope there, and that brings me to the final question from the audience that we'll have time for. Maybe, Mikael, you can give your views on this. Now, as the coup is entering its second year, what hope is there for the resistance, or for the future of Burma?
Well, I think, throughout this seminar, we have already picked up a few indications that there is hope. I think Debbie mentioned that the military is very spread out. They have lost some significant income sources, etc. But I think what is, at least for me, most hopeful is that we see that the resistance grows stronger and stronger every day. If someone told me on the 2nd of February last year that, a year from now, the resistance will be even stronger than it is today, I would think that they would have been wrong, but they weren't. It's really promising to see. We talked about the younger generation. They're not giving up. They're very persistent. We see the women have stepped forward in this crisis and taken on a leadership. I think leadership is key here. I listened to a scholar the other day who said that it's up to the Burmese people to lead the way. They cannot rely, clearly, they cannot rely on you know, the Western countries or the EU or the US to really change the situation. They have to lead the way, and then eventually, once there is hope, I'm sure other countries will also step in. But the younger generation and the women of Myanmar have to lead the way and tell us what to do. I think that's, and we're seeing this happen, and that gives me hope for the future.
Thank you. That's a good point to end on. Many thanks to everyone who's been watching online, and a special thank you to Debbie Stoddard, Mikael Hauer, and Tintin New. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Axel.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.